My name is Ashley Betts, and my presentation is over teaching for learning versus activity-based learning. Teaching for learning is units and lesson plans that are created for standard-based outcomes, and these standards are going to line up with the state and national mandated standards for PE. An example of one of those standards would be movement concepts, which is going to be how you walk, how you run, tracking those activities with like a pedometer or a heart rate monitor, that's going to determine the difference between like aerobic and anaerobic activities, something like that. The advantages of this teaching style is learning what the standards expect. So you're already told what those standards are. So when you give an assessment at the end of the year, or there's a national standard for what the students need to learn, you're already teaching those things. It's easier to teach new skills to students with varying levels. Most of the time in a classroom, students are going to be on many different levels. You'll have athletes, non-athletes. So teaching this way, you're able to reach students on several different levels because you're explaining what is expected at the beginning to a group rather than letting those students just jump in. So they're actually listening first, maybe observing you, give an example of what is to be expected. So it's very task-oriented. You have controllable outcomes. So if you want students to learn how to hit a racquetball at a certain angle, or teach them how to serve, you have a control on how to get the desired outcome because you're able to explain that or give an example first rather than just letting the students go and teach themselves. So you're giving them a task and giving them a direct goal. Motivation is easy with this style of learning because you can set the expectations. You can give an award system, so you can tell your students that there's going to be points awarded for correctly performing the skill 5 out of 10 times, or whichever team does the best, or you can give hustle points. So if you've got a team who's just doing everything they can, you can tell them that there's hustle points awarded, that you're the one awarding these points. So it's easy to motivate these students whenever you've got their attention in this way. Disadvantages of this learning style would be it's tough to keep those students engaged at the very beginning. A lot of the times it's boring for kids to sit and listen to instruction. Lectures are boring. So you may have to find a creative way to get their attention from the beginning with this teaching style, just because they're going to be ready to get in and start playing, especially if you already have equipment set up. If you've got nets and balls and rackets and different things laying around, they're going to be really tempted to grab those things and start playing with them. So it's best to probably keep those aside, or at least don't let them get them from the beginning, because they're going to be really distracted at the beginning. Activity-based learning. This is learning by doing. So you're letting the students get involved without a lot of instruction. So usually this is going to require a lot of planning on your part as the teacher. You're going to need to have the lesson set up exactly. Students tend to get off task. So if you let them kind of go at it on their own, they're going to stray from what you're trying to teach. They're going to hit the ball like crazy, or throw the ball, or play with their friends, or talk, or not even practice the skill at all. So you really have to have specific instruction and maybe set up certain learning stations. That way they're on task. The advantages of this style: it is a very active learning. A lot of kids learn by doing it rather than just listening how to do it or reading how to do it. It's easier to realize what you're doing wrong, or if you're doing it right. Again, this is for students who are probably already going to know the skill beforehand rather than learning it for the first time this way. Disadvantages: students must be familiar with the skill before this method can be used effectively. So if you're teaching a unit on volleyball and you let the students just start serving before you give them any kind of instruction, they're probably not going to do it well because they need to be familiar with that skill first. It's very ego-oriented, so a lot of the time students are going to want to compete with their friends in maybe a negative way. They're going to want to say, you know, I did it better than you, or you aren't any good, or make another student feel less if they're not as able to perform that particular skill, especially from the beginning. So for those students who aren't familiar with that skill, they may not do it well, and another student may make that noticeable. The uncontrollable outcomes. So you can't just let the students go off on their own and do this skill without being taught first, because they may or they may not get the intended lesson. So they may learn how to do it or they may not learn how to do it. You're really not in control this way, because students at all different levels are going out and kind of doing it themselves. So you're not really in control in this case. The students are in control, and they most likely won't get what they need to get out of it. Of teaching for learning. This is kind of a screenshot of what the benchmark and the standards look like. So over on the left column, content standard, just reading straight down, content standard 8. All students will develop and maintain healthy levels of flexibility of body joints. The benchmarks, so assessing this, assess personal status of flexibility, participate in a variety of physical activities appropriate for enhancing flexibility. So teaching for learning, I said, it kind of goes by a standards based. So this tells you what the standard is. So the standard is flexibility. So it's better for students to have a healthy fitness level. Flexibility is a big part of that. So you want to assess their own personal status of flexibility. How you're going to do that is by doing daily flexibility and stretching warm-up exercises, plyometrics, just sitting and seeing how far they can reach. A sit and reach is a good way to assess flexibility. So this is giving you a standard of how to teach and how to assess this and what they need to learn. So a lot of the times, you know, as long as a teacher has a standard to go by in this teaching method, they're going to be able to know, hey, my students need to learn how to be more flexible. They need to learn the benefits of a healthy body composition, whether that be doing the skin fold test or whatever that may be. So they need to have a standard for this teaching style. So another content standard, all students will apply the concepts of body awareness, time, space, direction, and force to movement. The benchmark for this standard is demonstrate slow and fast movement speeds, balance, coordination, and body awareness. A lot of this is just, like I said earlier, movement concepts, being able to walk, gallop. Several different motor skills are in play here. Activities, plyometric, motor skill, and warm-up activities. The assessment of this would be a daily participation score. This may be tough to do by just trying to observe every student, but it might be a good thing to have them work in groups or have each group actually demonstrate this activity to get those participation points. So in this way, you have a standard. So it's easy to identify that this school went by a standard base, a teaching for learning teaching style, because they actually have the content standard and the benchmarks. They have a way to assess. So they have an outcome, a desired outcome that is going to be there. Activity-based learning. So this particular school just listed out what would be done in the first quarter and second quarter and so on. So the first quarter states fundamentals of athletic participation. During the first quarter, students participate in a variety of sports, games, and activities focused on introducing them to the fundamentals of athletic participation. This includes the universal athletic position, understanding spatial awareness in sports, basic and advanced kicking skills, and throwing and catching a variety of objects. Content within the specific sports, games, and activities is further differentiated between grade levels. So then below that it says major sports offered, volleyball and soccer series. I think it's great that PE teachers can implement some team sports or different sports within their physical education unit, but it's not the only way to teach these skills. So kicking or throwing, you can do more things than just playing sports or putting those sport-themed games in there. And there's nothing wrong with that, but this is an activity-based learning. So basically just rolling out the ball and saying, here, kick it, throw it. It's not really teaching the movement concepts or the health-related fitness concepts. They're not getting, there's not really a standard here. There's not an outlined goal, an end game in this case. The second quarter, for example, says Introduction to Team Concept. A lot of these concepts that they're listed here are great, but they're not based on a standard, so you're not really in control of what your students are learning or not learning. Some of them will learn some of the concepts that are going to be on a standards-based curriculum, but probably not. I mean, not all of the students will. So it's really kind of hit or miss with this curriculum. Questions that need to be addressed. How do the two programs differ? The approach to learning, obviously. In the first, the teacher teaching to learn, you are standing in front of the students. It's more direct at first before you just let them loose and jump into the activity. Whereas the activity-based learning, the students really just jump into the activity first. So, that approach is way different. Students are listening first and then playing in one, and then in the other, they're playing first and then listening later. Student interaction is way different. Student interaction in the teaching to learn is more, again, listening first, but they're interacting with the teachers differently and interacting with each other differently. Whereas in the activity-based, I think it leaves more room for the ego, like I had mentioned earlier. How would a visitor to each of the websites or schools be informed about best practices and programs within the physical education program? Well, curriculum is pretty much a school mandated or state mandated thing to have up. A lot of parents or other schools would like to know what everyone is doing in their physical education program or other classrooms. So the curriculum is outlined. There's usually a tab that you can click on and go in to read that. There's also contact info listed for officials at the school, so that's a good way to get information on those.